Hello, I was just about to time a little sermon that I've been asked to share tomorrow morning at a Christian nursing home, and then I thought, why don't I time it by videoing it? Then I can put this video up on YouTube because it's very relevant to this YouTube channel because I've been asked to talk a bit about this process I'm going through of discerning whether I'm called to religious life or about kind of following Jesus or those kinds of themes. And I'm actually going to be sharing a few things that I felt God showing to me the past few months. So it's all the kinds of thing that I would put on this channel anyway. So I'd like to share three different images with you. The first is of a field of sheep, which is very much in my mind at the moment because I was in Wales just the other week. And when you're in a setting surrounded by hills and sheep, and you're familiar with the Bible, all kinds of Bible passages start coming to mind because the Bible's full of that kind of imagery. And one of the most obvious ones is the 23rd Psalm, and the Lord is my shepherd. And I noticed that when I hold that image in my mind, I often imagine sheep following a shepherd along a path or through a meadow or up a hill, but it's very much a walking image. But while I was in Wales, I often found myself looking out over patchworks of fields, and some fields were empty and other fields had sheep in them. And I felt God speaking to me through that image, saying that these staying in the field that the shepherd has put you in is also a very important spiritual picture. For a start, like our daily walk with Jesus, it is very much like a sheep walking, following a shepherd along a path. But our lives overall often looks more like God putting us in this field for this number of years, like living here or doing this form of ministry or having this job, and then a number of years down the line, then God might ask us to move to this field, and then we stay there for however long God wants us to stay there, and then God moves us on to another field. And linked to that image, I felt God pointing out the importance of staying in the field that God's put you in, and not being envious of other fields. So you know the saying about the grass is always greener on the other side, and I think that can be true of Christians or Christian ministry too. That often we are not satisfied with the context that we find ourselves in, and we wish we were doing something more obviously mission-like or more evangelistic or more active, or where we feel more helpful or that kind of thing. Francis de Sales was a bishop a few centuries ago, and he'd write letters of spiritual guidance to just ordinary people, trying to point out the value of their present ordinary contexts. He was the one that coined the phrase "bloom where you're planted," and he would say that where you are right now, that's where God wants you, that's where God will use you, that's the context that God will use to speak to you through and teach you through and help you mature spiritually. And so he would encourage people not to be envious of other people's ministries or try to do something other than what God was asking of them, which might feel more ordinary or more boring. But that was where God was wanting them. And Mother Teresa would say similar things, like people would go across to India offering to help her with her work, and she'd send them back home saying, no, God wants you in your living room at home, God wants you back in the shop where you work, God needs you to stay in your city. And she would say it's really important that we don't go looking for exciting ministry or mission opportunities, but when God's asking us to stay put in our present context, because that's where God wants to use us, and that's the context that God wants to use to teach us things through and that kind of thing. So I felt God especially pointing out or bringing to my attention the line of the 23rd Psalm that talks about he makes me lie down in green pastures, because that kind of pointed out to me that following Jesus isn't always about walking. Sometimes it's about staying put in the field that God's put us in. And then the second image I'd like to share with you is that of the disciples letting go of their nets. And I guess that there are so many things in our lives that we could see as what the letting go is symbolizing. Like there are so many things that in our lives that God might ask us to let go of at different times. It might be things like let go of homes or relationships or like possessions, or it might be kind of more abstract things like let go of our autonomy or our self-sufficiency or our previous lives, or certain ways of thinking that we used to hold. But just like, although the disciples, they let go of their nets to follow Jesus, and that was a very kind of definite sort of once in a lifetime event. I'm sure you've kind of experienced that Christian life is more like a whole series of letting goes, of various things at various times. And so I felt God pointing out to me that letting go is another important part of following Jesus. It's not just the walking, it's the letting go that enables the walking. And then the third image I'd like to share with you is that of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. When I spent some time living at the convent, and some of the sisters that I was living alongside, one or two of them were in wheelchairs or dependent on or used mobility scooters, and some of them had like horrible illnesses like dementia or Parkinson's, and I felt God speaking to me through them and pointing out that these were sisters who were going through just as much a transition as I'm going through at the moment, or potentially will be. And I felt God pointing out that these are people who've given their whole lives to following Jesus and dedicated to God's service, and these are people who spent their whole lives helping people and being in kind of mission or ministry kind of roles. Some of them have been missionaries in Africa for years, for example, but now they were having to go through this profound spiritual journey of learning to let go of some of the things that they'd used to do, or having to learn to be helped when they were the ones that had spent most of their lives helping others. And I feel like this is a kind of a maturing or a journey that we see in the disciples themselves. Like when the disciples are first called, it feels more like, or it seems more in the Gospels, like at first they were listening to Jesus' teaching and learning from his teaching and learning what his message was, but then it feels like they were then joining in Jesus in his active ministry in the towns and villages. But as we get towards the end of the Gospels, I see something even more profound, as if Jesus is helping them grow in their understanding of what it means to follow Jesus, and that it's not all about what you're doing. So towards the end of the Gospels, at the Last Supper, it's almost like the climax of Jesus' apostleship training. He washes their feet, and although that's often used as an example of how Jesus asks us to be servants, I also see almost the opposite in that of Jesus showing them the importance of letting him do something for them, or letting other people do something for them. And it's as if, in my mind, Jesus is saying that there comes a point in Christian maturity where you need to let go of your need to be needed, and you need to be willing to let other people help you, willing to be dependent on other people, willing to let other people have roles that you would have preferred, and that kind of thing. And kind of linked to that, after the resurrection, when Jesus is talking with Peter on the beach, he says, "Most assuredly I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish." And then shortly after that, he says, "Follow me." And in my mind, it's he's saying that following him actually involves these kinds of things that he's just described, that following Jesus, it's about something even deeper than just joining him in his ministry. In my thinking, I see following Jesus at its most deep as about intimately sharing in Jesus' life, which can include active ministry, but is wider and deeper than that. So for people that feel called to religious life, that they're intimately sharing in Jesus' poverty, in Jesus' celibacy, but I think all Christians are called to to share intimately in Jesus' life, and that includes sharing in other, in some of the things that maybe happened to Jesus, or that Jesus experienced. So I come from more Anglo-Catholic tradition, where we sometimes meditate on some of the things that happened as Jesus walked to Calvary. And so some of the things that we meditate on are things like when Jesus was stripped. Sometimes we might think about, well, in what ways is Jesus asking me to follow him in allowing myself to be stripped in whatever way that means in my life at the moment, or we meditate on Jesus falling and then needing to be helped back up again, or we meditate on Jesus needing help carrying his cross. So in these kinds of reflections, we see that following Jesus is not always about more active ministry. It's not always about going to places. It's actually about sharing in Jesus' life, like in a really intimate way that's even deeper than those things.